Alrighty, today we're going to engage in a whole new study of cultural institutions. We're going to talk about economics in culture. The whole basis of this, of course, is the economic anthropology, or approach to culture through economics. And we're going to look at a whole different feature of culture than you would if you were to take, say, a business course or an economics course. Because the business course, the economics course, will look at modern day business and the modern day practices. We want to go back to a more fundamental understanding of not just business, not just economics, but the whole concept of the transfer of wealth, the transfer of items of importance, how they move through culture. And we're going to look at the very simplest forms to the most complex forms, and we're going to note how even the simplest forms function within complex societies. So for today, we're going to look at five topics within the whole series. We're going to look at reciprocal systems, or reciprocity. We're going to look at redistribution systems. We're going to look at market systems. Then we're going to take a special look at capitalism. And because I'm the professor, and since I'm in charge, we get to do it my way. We're going to look at capitalism from a point of view that is probably not what you hear in the normal economics class. And then we're going to have some Christian reflections on the whole system of economic exchange. Now, let me remind you once again that we've looked at this broad chart, and we've looked at production systems up there on the top left-hand corner. Now we're moving to the right, looking at economic systems, redistribution, reciprocity, and market economies. We're moving our way through each one of these important systems. So let's begin then with a discussion of reciprocity. Now, in the analysis of cultures, anthropologists have discriminated on the basis of their understanding of culture three types of reciprocity systems. And the first of these is what we call generalized reciprocity. Now, let's confine ourselves to the discussion of reciprocity. What are we talking about when we talk about reciprocity? The whole concept of reciprocity is that we are giving something with the expectation that it will be reciprocated with some kind of a return. So reciprocity is a system of exchange in which there is give and take. Now, we've said that the first kind is generalized reciprocity. There is a second kind of reciprocity that functions, and it is what we call balanced reciprocity. And balanced reciprocity is slightly different, but it is an integral part of each of these kinds of systems. And then there is a third one, which is called negative reciprocity. And those are the three types of reciprocity we want to look at. So let's go back, knowing now kind of the broad outline of where we're going. Let's look at the characteristics that are associated with that first one that we have called generalized reciprocity. And the first characteristic that we want to take note of in respect to generalized reciprocity is the fact that it is found in virtually every society. Certain cultural traits are what we call universals. You find them in every culture. And generalized reciprocity is found in every culture. Now, it is best known as a form of gift giving. In some societies, gift giving is the most extensive manner in which items of wealth pass between individuals. In some societies, gift giving is reserved for ceremonial purposes. Sometimes it is reserved for special friendships. Sometimes it functions alongside of the regular economic system. Let me give you an example. We give gifts in our society. Now, when do we give gifts in our society?
Birthdays.
Birthdays.
Anniversaries.
Anniversaries.
Christmas time.
Christmas. Every Friday? No. We usually give gifts on some kind of special occasion. Well, let me ask you this question. Why do we give gifts? What's the function of giving gifts? While you're thinking, all right? Christmas is a time of gift giving, is it not? Okay? We give gifts at Christmas. Now, several years ago, we had returned from the mission field. We had found out that we could not return to the mission field. The mission board had said, well, if you want to stay with the mission board, you've got to accept a reassignment. How about going to the Philippines? I looked at my wife. I don't think so. This is not a time for us to make a transition to a whole new field, whole new language, whole new culture. Besides, there were certain things that were happening in our family, certain dynamics, and it became very apparent. By this time, our two boys were in college. Our daughter was in high school, going through some adjustments. It was time for us to spend time with our daughter, assisting her in the transition back to life in this country. So we said no. We don't think reassignment's for us. And the mission said, well, blessings on you. You just got your last paycheck. What do we do now? Here it is, September. No more money. We just got our last paycheck. So I was in the middle of graduate studies at the time, so I went running up to the university and said, hey, school's about ready to start, and do you need any teaching assistants? Because I could sure use the money. So they appointed me as teaching assistant, and my wife went out and found a teaching job. And we managed to get, between the two of us, enough money together to keep body and soul together and pay rent and everything. But come Christmas time, we didn't have two nickels to rub together. But it's time to give presents. Well, is it time to cancel Christmas? No, we don't want to cancel Christmas. But we had to make a decision. We didn't have an awful lot of money. It's Christmas time. We want to have a good time. So we struggled and struggled. Finally, he said, look, let's be realistic. We can't afford an extravagant Christmas, but we do want to give presents to one another. So let's put a limit. Let's have a self-imposed limit. We will not spend more than $25 on a gift or on a person. So no more than $25. So I'll buy my wife a present for $25. She'll buy me a present for $25. I'll buy my son a present for $25. If he wants to buy me a present for $25, that's fine. So we all decided that that would be the limit. And we would be able to give gifts without going broke. So I remember thinking, my son at the time was in college, and you know, typical missionary kid. He was running around with missionary barrel clothes, and we wanted him to look a little bit more spliffy. So I remember going down to Eddie Bauer's and looking around and finding, a really cool Eddie Bauer sports shirt that my son could wear on campus and be a cool dude. And it was, $25. So I bought my son, a real cool Eddie Bauer shirt. And my son, a day or two later, went to the very same shopping mall and said, oh yeah, I got to buy my dad something. And my dad's now teaching at the university, and he needs to look professional, and he's got all those shirts with the yellow stains and stuff, and he really needs to look more professional. So he went into, I don't know what store actually anymore now, but it couldn't have been a real extravagant store, because what he did was he bought me for $25. He bought me a shirt, a nice dress shirt, and a tie. Now, normally they're 25 bucks a piece, but somehow or another, he managed to make a good deal. So he bought me a shirt and a matching tie, and boxed it all up, and I boxed mine all up, and we all boxed each other's presents up, and came, and we had this marvelous Christmas. See? I give my son a shirt, he gives me a shirt. See? And I give my wife a sweater, and she gave me, I don't, forget what it was now, but she gives me something equally. And so we were having this time of gift giving. Now, wasn't that rather silly of us to be doing? I mean, come on, here we were, half broke, couldn't really afford to give presents, and we're taking what little cash we have, and we're buying each other same kind of presents, $25, $25. Wasn't that stupid? I mean, after all, why didn't I just tell my son, look, take your 25 bucks, go buy yourself something. I'll take my 25 bucks, go buy myself something, and we won't have to worry about, what I'm getting. We'll just buy something we really could use. Maybe I'll just use my $25 to, pay the electric bill. That'll take the old pressure off. And Joanne, my wife, yeah, she could take $25 and buy the turkey, see? And we won't worry about giving each other presents. Would that work? Why did we go to all that trouble? To figure out how much to spend, to make sure it was equal, all this sort of stuff, and then buy presents for one another. What's the significance of all this gift giving anyway? Is it ever right to cancel Christmas? So why'd we do it? What is involved in gift giving?
You want to show appreciation for each other.
Show appreciation for one another. All righty. You're exactly right. You see, gift giving is invested with emotional attachment. Thank you. You knew that was coming, didn't you? Are you psychic or something? No, it's logical. That's what gift giving is all about. It is invested with emotional attachment. When we give somebody a gift, is it the gift that counts? No, what is it that counts? The thought. How many times have you heard people say that? It's not the gift that counts, it's the thought. And the thought is, I'm thinking of my son, I'm thinking of what I want him to be, I'm thinking of his image, I'm thinking of doing something for him that will help him to improve his self-identity and to be what he wants to be on the college environment. And he's thinking of me. And I'm thinking of my wife, and she's thinking of me, and we're all thinking of my daughter. We're thinking of one another. And we're showing an emotional investment. And when it comes, see, we remember it. And to this day, now I happen to be wearing a green tie today because it's St. Patrick's Day. But whenever I put on a tie that my wife bought me, I remember, hey, you know what? This is the tie my wife bought. This is the tie my son bought. It brings back the renewed memories, the feelings. You see, gift giving. Gift giving is a way of binding us closer together. Now, do we try to keep up when we give gifts? In a family. On that particular Christmas, we agreed only to spend $25 on each other. But on most Christmases, do we sit down and say, now let's see, last year, Dad spent $100 on my present. I guess I better buy him a $100 present this year. I mean, is that what you think when you come to Christmas time? Gee, Mom and Dad bought me a really nice outfit last year. I better spend an equal amount of money on them this year. Is that what motivates our gift giving? No. No. Do you know why? Because in gift giving, we don't keep a balance sheet. We don't keep a balance sheet. Why don't we keep a balance sheet? Because it's not the gift that counts, it's the thought. Okay? It's the thought that counts. So no balance sheets. So on that very same Christmas, we all gave $25 gifts to one another. My sons who were working, going to college, my wife and I, we all exchanged $25 gifts. But I had a daughter in high school. She wasn't working. She didn't have any money. She didn't have much of an allowance. She wanted to buy gifts too. She didn't happen to have $25 for me, $25 for her mother, $25 for her brother, and $25 for her other brother. That's $100. She had maybe $10. So what did my daughter do? She went down to the very same mall that we all went to. But she went to a different store. And when it came Christmas Day, I got this little package. You know, rattle, 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 what is it, you know? Opened it up, and you know what was inside? There was a mug. A $2 mug. Now, I just bought her a $25 outfit to wear to high school, and she just gave me a $2 mug. Boy, did I get ripped off, right? And you know what the mug said? Hey, most promising teacher. Hey. Oh, isn't that sweet? Hey. A mug that I could take to school, see? And I could remember my daughter with. And that could help me to aspire, see? To be a great teacher. See? And I could show it to all my friends. I could say, this is my daughter gave it to me. Because once again, is it the gift that counts? Or is it the thought? Well, it's the thought. And my daughter was thinking about what she wanted me to be. Now, that's one of the characteristics of generalized reciprocity. You do it between friends. There is a maximum of emotional investment. People give gifts to one another because they want to be emotionally involved. And so it takes place between people who have a deep level of commitment to one another. And you want to know something? Whole economies can be built on this kind of generalized reciprocity, where there is a complete system of trust and of acceptance. You don't have any clothes? I'll give you my clothes. You know, this was the kind of relationship that David and Jonathan had. See, here came David into the castle. He didn't have any good clothes. Jonathan said, hey, come on. I'll put clothes on you. You can help. You can wear my clothes. You can have the royal clothes. Because we're buddies. We can be bonded together in brotherhood. And we can go out. And we can hunt. And you can tell me about the out of doors. And you can tell me how to track. And we'll have great times together. See? We'll share everything that we have together. And it won't matter. We're not going to keep a balance sheet. You owe me because I did this. See, true friends are like this. They don't keep a balance sheet. And in the Donnie culture, this happened. If people were hungry, those who had food shared. If somebody had 2 gourds and somebody else cracked theirs, here, I'm carrying an extra gourd. Put it on. You just cracked yours. See, and I've been to feasts where young ladies will show up with brand new grass skirts that they've just made. And they've worked hard. And somewhere along the line, they found some carbon paper, because we were still using carbon paper in those days. And the carbon paper would have a nice blue ink. And they had taken that carbon paper and soaked it in water and had gotten blue water. And they had stained all of the edge of the grass around the bottom of the skirts with an inch of blue trim. See, and then halfway up, they had put a line all the way around the grass skirt, see, so that they had blue trim on their dresses. See? And 3 of them or 4 of them had done this, and they came to one of the village feasts, you know, swishing their grass skirts, and they looked so nice, you know, brand new grass skirts, and they were so white in color, and then with that bright blue trim, and everybody's head turned, as these girls sashayed around. And for 2 days they wore this during the feast. And then it was time to share. See? The next thing you know, about the 3rd day of the feast, I see 4 other girls sashaying around. Those aren't the same girls. No, they had given their dresses to their friends so that they could attract the attention of certain young men who were also at the feast. And, courtship was in full blossom. Well, that's what happens in reciprocal societies. See? And generalized reciprocity functions where there's a high level of commitment. Now, that's not the only kind of reciprocity. There is what we call balanced reciprocity. Now, in balanced reciprocity, there are some very distinctive characteristics that are slightly different than the characteristics that we find in generalized reciprocity. There is a similarity in that they are marked by trust bonds of relationships. But there is not the deep level of emotional attachment. There is a deep level of trust, but there is not emotional investment. So what happens here is I establish a trading relationship with another individual. Perhaps I live in this valley. My friend lives in another valley. We establish a trust relationship, a balance or a trade relationship. And I say to him, look, I'll help take care of some of your needs, you help take care of some of my needs, and we won't have to bargain. We will simply work together to meet each other's needs. This is the kind of relationship that could exist between relatives, good friends, military allies, or trading partners. And you would never consider cheating on such a person. Because after all, they're your friend. After all, they're your ally. After all, they're your trade partner. You don't cheat somebody who is a friend. So there's no need to haggle. There's no need to bargain. There's no need to up a price or down a price. You come to a person, he's your trade partner, and you say to that trade partner, you know what? I really need an axe. I broke my axe. Can you help me out with an axe? And your trade partner will say, yes, I have an extra axe. I will make it available to you. You don't have to say then, well, what are you going to want for it? What's the price? Come on, let's dicker here a little bit. Ah, it's a little bit too much. Can't you drop the price? You would never do that to a friend. You would expect him to give you the axe, and if he had a price that he wanted, he would tell it to you, or more likely than not, he would simply give it to you and say, someday, when I need something in return, you will return it to me. But the return will be an agreed return of something of equal value. Now, this kind of activity, when it takes place between people of different regions, will help to create social, economic, and military bonds between regions. When you have a friend in the next valley, you know you can go to him, and he will help to meet your needs. Things that are abundant there that are scarce here, he will make available to you. Things that are abundant here but scarce there, you will make available to him. So you develop these strong social ties of, that's my friend. We work together. Economic needs are met in this way. And in case of military alliances, we can turn to those people. The other thing that happens, because this is balanced reciprocity, you expect some kind of mutual reciprocation that will be of the same total value. Now, that same value may not be reciprocated immediately. That may take a while. As a matter of fact, in Donny culture, we discovered that that same value system could take as many as 2 generations to work out. And it usually didn't take that long, but it would be worked out over a period of years. Now, I've said that sometimes whole economic systems are built on this principle. Do you know, this is exactly the kind of economic principle that worked in a series of islands off of the coast of New Guinea. And it was a system of economic exchange that was studied by a very famous anthropologist by the name of Branislaw Malinowski. And Branislaw Malinowski studied this circle of islands, and he called the system of exchange there the cooler ring, because there was this whole series of islands that were connected by these exchanges. And what he found in the cooler ring was that people would establish trading relationships with somebody on the next island. And in that exchange with the next island, they would establish these bonds of trading partnership by the giving of very, very valuable necklaces. And these very, very valuable necklaces would pass from one person to another who, when they gave it to another person, would say, I want to be your trading partner. And by receiving it, you became then obligated to that person to become their trading partner, and the obligations were that you would never cheat that person. Now, what were they trading? What they were trading was, they were trading fish for sweet potatoes. See, people further out in the lagoon had an abundance of fish. People who were closer to the mainland had an abundance of sweet potatoes. People out in the lagoon needed the sweet potatoes. People who were closer inland needed the fish, because closer into the mainland there were only small fish. The necklaces traveled counterclockwise. Food traveled clockwise. So, folk out in the outer lagoon would come in, paddling to their destination, joining up with their trading partners, and pull in with just a whole canoe load of dried fish. Fishing had really been good. Big old yellowfin tuna cut up into nice steaks and dried in the sun, preserved so that it could be cooked in with your sago or with your food, and moisturized again and create a really tasty seafood dish. Pull in with this whole canoe load of marvelous meat and expect to return home, see, with a canoe load of sweet potatoes. Well, it would often turn out somebody would pull in canoe load of fish, and the person that they were going to trade with, perhaps his wife had been sick, perhaps there had been tragedy in the family, maybe a death, perhaps there had been a poor growing season, and the sweet potato season was bad, and they hadn't hardly anything to trade with. Well, in our culture, we'd say, ah, well, you got nothing to trade, I'll trade with somebody else. You wouldn't do that in the cooler ring. This is still your trade partner. You would heap him up with all your fish. Oh, and he'd be so grateful. Oh my goodness, look at all this fish. We've been hungry for potatoes and I don't have anything to eat, and now I got all this fish. Oh, thank you, isn't life wonderful? But you know what? You got to paddle home with no sweet potatoes. Would you feel despondent? Would you feel like, yeah, I got ripped off, this is terrible? No. You travel home, empty canoe and all, but you would know that he would do everything in his power to ensure the next time around you will go home with enough sweet potatoes to feed the whole village. He will make it up to you. He will not cheat you. You don't cheat in the system, because if you cheat in the system, you know what happens? You're out. You don't have a trading partner. So the next season around, there'd be this marvelous parade of canoes that would pull in. Hayward, remember last time you came? Gave me all that marvelous fish. This whole flotilla of canoes, sweet potatoes for you. Say, throw a big feast for the village and be a really big man. See? Now that's how balanced reciprocity works. And we saw this balanced reciprocity working among the Mulia Dani. They gave to one another. As a matter of fact, what we discovered was, we went into the New Guinea highlands, and we, by an accident of fate, I don't know what else to call it, the best place for an airstrip in our valley was right at the 1 mile mark, about 5,000 feet, 5,000 some odd hundred feet. So we were right at this altitude, and the airstrip was about 3,000 feet long, and it was a 10% slope, which meant that the bottom of the airstrip was 300 feet lower than the top of the airstrip. When you wanted to land, you had to dive down, and then flare out and land uphill, and then you had to climb 300 feet from touchdown to the top of the airstrip, which was a great way to slow down, because you had to actually turn on the power to get up to the top, and when it was time to take off, all you had to do was just get airborne and then fly level. See? By the end of the airstrip, you'd already be 300 feet in the air. Well, it was a great little airstrip, and it served our functions. But you know what was interesting? We were right at the break between ecological zones. And what we discovered was that at the bottom of the airstrip, pandanus fruit, red pandanus fruit would grow well. But you could not grow red pandanus feet 300 feet higher. So I had a red pandanus fruit growing right in my backyard, and I was right at the top of the airstrip. And it would never flower. The tree would grow, but it would never flower. Just a few feet higher, I had another tree growing. It was a pandanus nut. Entirely different than the pandanus fruit. It was a white nut. That was the lowest level of a pandanus nut tree. From that point on, pandanus nut grew prolifically. We discovered some other things. We brought in some other vegetables. And we discovered that tomatoes and beans and peanuts growed marvelous at the bottom of the airstrip. But if you went above the airstrip, you could grow white potatoes and cabbage in abundance. And corn would grow either place. Now, I don't know what was happening there. Cold, altitude, several factors all came together, but it was an ecological breaking point. So what we found was that those people living down valley would come into red pandanus fruit season. And the folk up valley couldn't have any red pandanus fruit because it all grew down there. So when there was an abundance of red pandanus fruit, they would have a huge red pandanus feast. And they would invite all the people from up valley to come down and have red pandanus. And then, when the white pandanus would come into season, all of the folk down valley would be invited up valley to have a white pandanus feast. And then, we discovered another phenomenon that was taking place. Peanuts would grow so good at the lower levels. Wouldn't grow at the higher levels. But peanuts were a great source of nutrition. And the folk at the higher altitudes needed it. And so folk at the higher altitudes started to contract with the folk down valley. We'll bring pigs to you, and you can exchange our pigs for your peanuts. And day in and day out, we'd see people leading pigs down valley. And a day or two later, we'd see them coming back carrying huge bundles of peanuts on their head. And a whole new exchange system was being developed with the introduction of new crops. And you know what? the Up Valley people and the Down Valley people continued to build social relationships, military alliances, and brotherly ties, because by this point they were Christians, between each area. And wealth continued to flow through a system of reciprocity. And as we became aware of this system of reciprocity, we began to build it into our whole system of mutual church support for the building of churches and for the support of the local congregations. Well, it was a marvelous discovery. And we'll tell you when we get a little bit further in, when we start talking about some reflections on all of this, how we became deeply involved in it and became much more successful, becoming a part of this whole system than some other areas where missionaries had failed to appreciate the value of reciprocity. Well, we've talked about balanced reciprocity and how important this was. Let me give you just one more little example from Donnie culture about the importance of balanced reciprocity. Balanced reciprocity works very, very importantly in a culture in which egalitarianism or equality is important. And the Donnie were a very egalitarian type of culture. And at a feast, it was so important that there was no preference shown to anybody, that they would practice an exaggerated form of ritual reciprocity. And here's how they would do it. When it came time for a feast to be announced, certain people would bring a pig to that feast. Those who couldn't bring a pig would bring sweet potatoes or vegetables, and everybody would work real hard to prepare the feast site. They would dig the pits, they would heat the rocks, they would line the rocks with banana leaves and grasses. Then they would line the pit with hot rocks. And those who had brought pigs would kill the pigs and gut them out. And they would put all the vegetables inside. They would put more hot rocks on top of the vegetables. Then they would lay the pig in on top and more hot rocks on top of it. Then seal it all up and cook the meat and the vegetables. And after a couple of hours of steaming in these hot pit ovens, they would then pull off all the hot rocks and all of the lids and covers and bring the meat out. And then the person who owned the pig would hold it up, and some of his friends would then begin to carve huge slices of meat off of it. And he would cut off 5-pound slabs of meat or of fat, and lay all those down on an apron laid out on the ground of banana leaves until the whole pig then had been carved up into 5-pound pieces. And every piece had an assigned value, so that if you took ribs, there would be certain kinds of values. If you had a hind leg versus a foreleg, there would be a certain value to a foreleg, certain value to a hind leg, certain values to the hocks versus the shoulder. There would be a value assigned to the jaw or to the snout, and it would all be laid out there. And when they got all done, and there would be maybe 50 to 100, depending on how big the feast was, 50 to 100 pigs all slaughtered, cut up into 5-pound slabs of meat. And then the feast chief, sometimes we call him the feast chief, sometimes we call him the owner of the feast, the host of the feast. There's a whole number of titles that we use. But the person who was responsible for the organization of the feast would stand up, and everybody would be sitting around in their clan groups or their villages. And he would say, "It is time now to give meat to Widegele." And everybody would pick up 1 or 2 pieces of meat, and all the people would go running over and drop those pieces of meat into a pile in front of the Widegele group. And then they would come back. And of course their hands would be all greasy, and they'd be wiping grease on their dry skin. It was a great way to get all oiled up, you know, drying yourself off like this. And then they would grab another couple of pounds or a couple of hunks of meat, and the feast chief would wave his hand like this again, and he would say, "Time for wuyaneri." And everybody would go running over, and wuyaneri would have a bunch of banana leaves on the ground, and they would put a pile there, and there'd be a huge pile. I mean, it could be 2 feet high of meat. And then they would come running back, and then now mulianeri, and everybody would go running over and pile it in front of mulianeri. And when the first distribution was all done, there would be a distribution of those 50 to 100 pigs into all of these piles for everybody at the feast. Now, That was first distribution. Second distribution, it was the job of each of the clan leaders then to sit down and take those 5-pound pieces of meat, start cutting them up into quarter-pound or half-pound slices. So they would do that, and break it all up into pieces. And then they would look around and estimate the size of the crowd. And then they would pick one piece that was a lot of fat, one piece that was a lot of meat, one piece that was a lot of bone, and take it over and hand it to each person. Everybody would get assigned value depending on if you got 2 pieces of fat, then somebody else couldn't get 2 pieces of meat. You had to make sure that you got equal value. And if somebody got a piece of very, very bone, say you got the snout, the nose, that's not a very value. You make sure that they gave them then a good piece of the thigh with a lot of good meat on it, and you would get that. So everybody got equal portions, and they worked very, very hard to make sure that there was no imbalance, that nobody got favoritism. That was the second distribution. We were watching balanced reciprocity taking place here. Nobody got more than anybody else. But just to ensure that nobody got any more, then here I've got my, say, 3 or 4 pounds of meat with several different pieces. I would then start cutting it up into small little bite sizes, cut it all up into little bite sizes, and then now I got a handful, well, 4 pounds of meat all in bite sizes, and I would leave some here, and I would pick up a whole handful, and then I would go around and I would start passing it out to other people, This is the third distribution. And as I'm passing it out to you, you're giving me stuff, and so we're passing meat back and forth, and I'm seeing little kids, and sometimes just to make sure that somebody does take it, and they'll maybe take a piece and shove it in your mouth, and we're sharing all this meat, and of course everybody's hands all dirty and greasy. But it doesn't matter, you're still eating. Do you know why? Because it's not the meat that's important. What's important here is that we are thinking about one another. And we are ensuring, that we are demonstrating reciprocity and gift-giving that says what's important is you are my friends, and I've given you without ever consideration of my own needs. You are so important that you come first in my life. Now, that was a typical Donny feast, and I have done it dozens and dozens of times. And I've walked away from a feast actually hungry, because I gave everything away. But you know what? That was the mark of a big man. You didn't go to a feast to get full. You went to a feast, to help others. Well, that's balanced reciprocity. And I say I came away hungry sometimes. In point of fact, often the Donnies, knowing that we would give away so much food, would actually have a preliminary gift giving in which they would cut out some of the very best of the pork roast and bring it to us, and say, here, keep this. Don't share it with anybody. This is yours. This is my gift to you. And we'd go home after a feast and find maybe a whole bucket full of raw red meat there, all ready to be cut up and diced up and washed off and put in the cooker and cooked for our supper. So it didn't matter. That was not what was important here. Was the building of social ties. Well, that's balanced reciprocity. There's a different kind of reciprocity yet to talk about, and that is negative reciprocity. Negative reciprocity. And there is a distinct characteristic of negative reciprocity. In negative reciprocity, you seek to gain more than you give. There's no consideration here for just simply meeting somebody else's need. There is no consideration here for getting an equal thing back. You want to cheat the other person. You may even threaten the other person. You may say, if you don't give it to me, that's it, I'm out of here. We're enemies. You may make exaggerated claims. You lousy cheapskate. You're not a man at all. You're just nothing but a wimp, What kind of people are you that you don't have better consideration for us, your allies, And well, you see this. You'll see this in Yanomamo culture. The Yanomamos will stand up and they'll put on a display of absolute arrogance and anger, trying to get as much as they can. See, because this is negative reciprocity. Well, these are the kinds of exchanges you do with outsiders or with weaker allies or with people that you despise. And it does take place. It does take place. And a lot of cultures practice negative reciprocity. And so you're always on your guard. You're always expecting to get cheated. You don't consider people that you are dependent upon as being your friends. You're always looking to them to cheat you. Well, these are the three kinds of reciprocal systems. Now, what are some of the implications now of this system of exchange of goods? And you'll notice that we're not talking just about money now. The economics often talks about goods, but we're talking about any kind of value. Any kind of value that moves from one culture to another culture, one part of the culture to another part of the culture. And you know what? That stuff of value could be women, who are very valuable, or children, or animals, or game, or clothes, or headdresses, or bows and arrows, or baskets, or anything that you can make. Anything that's considered of value can be exchanged, and you can even create things of value. The Donny, for instance, created a very interesting object of exchange. They were stone objects, river stones, that had been polished. But each stone object represented a human life. And these stone objects were exchanged whenever there was a transfer of people from one group to another group. And so when you had a bride exchange and a woman was moving from one clan to another clan, as she moved from this clan to that clan, stones representing her would be transferred with her, symbolic of the value that was placed upon her. And so we create objects of wealth that will represent these individuals. Now, we won't get into the well, maybe we should. There's an anthropologist who's looked at the exchange of stone wealth between various clan groups, especially in wedding, and said that one of the things that represents here is the woman represents reproductive strength, and the stones represent productive strength. The stones are something that men produce. Women are individuals who can now reproduce another human being. They can create children. So you've got productive strength and reproductive strength, and whenever this takes place between two groups, what happens here is that you are exchanging the productive potential of the exchange and the reproductive potential, so that the social ties between the two groups are strengthened, both the things that we can make and the things that we can reproduce in terms of new human beings. It's a very, very symbolic kind of transfer. Well, there are some very, very strong social implications that we want to look at. Reciprocity in any form intensifies the relationships between two people. Now, what happens if we have a girlfriend, find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and we decide that it is time to give a gift? Let's say it is your girlfriend's birthday, and you've got to give her a gift. All right? What's an appropriate gift for a girl that you have dated 6 or 7 times? Is red roses an appropriate gift? You're saying no. Okay, red rose. How about perfume? Perfume okay for 6 or 7 dates? No. How about a Biola sweatshirt? Yeah, tacky. Is a Biola sweatshirt ever appropriate to give to your girlfriend? No. Is a Biola sweatshirt ever appropriate to give to a boyfriend? Yeah. What about, well, wait a minute. Last Valentine's, I decided I was really going to do a number on my wife. So I ordered a dozen red roses for Valentine's. And I had them delivered to her at school, right in the middle of the day, so that they would arrive right in the middle of the day, be delivered to the main office, and they would have to call her out of her classroom to come and get a dozen red roses, and everybody in the whole school would know that she got a dozen red roses from her husband. See? She couldn't hide it, and everybody was going to say, oh, isn't that nice, look at your husband, you know, and they'd all have to brag on her, and it would make her feel good all day long as everybody in her school congratulated her on getting a dozen red roses. Did I screw up? You just said a dozen red roses wasn't appropriate. Is it appropriate for a husband to give red roses to his wife? Yeah. Red roses to a wife is okay. Red roses to girlfriend isn't okay. Or is it? Anybody here ever get red roses? You did. How deep is the relationship? Well, that's exactly the problem. You see, gifts signify something about the relationship. Gift giving does something. It symbolizes something. Now, when I was doing my study of buying and selling luxury cars in Santa Barbara, the salesperson said, you know what? Whenever I sell a Mercedes-Benz, you know what the first thing I do is? I send a gift basket to the purchaser. I said, you send a gift basket? Yeah, what do you send? They said, we send a bottle of champagne, and we send a mix of cheeses. And so this arrives on the afternoon or the next day after they bought the car. If they bought it late, they send it the next day. So that that person gets this, thank you for doing business with us, bottle of champagne and cheeses to sit around and eat and drink and think about their new car and the wonderful salesperson that sold it to them and bring them back. Now, do business people give gifts to one another? All the time. Bottles of this or cans of this or fruit baskets. I mean, this is a very popular kind of gift between people who do business with one another. I mean, and it intensifies the relationship. It says, hey, I appreciate your business. Here's a Christmas gift for you. But gift giving does something else. See, gift giving also establishes character. It will also establish character. If we give gifts, we establish that we are morally responsible individuals. You know, now we had a situation. Our airstrip was in major problem. We needed to repair our airstrip, and we needed to get some help. And I was looking at this whole thing of gift giving and of mutuality and of exchange, and I discovered that there was still a third principle, this idea of mutuality. And our airstrip needed to be completely stripped of a very, very tough crabgrass that had grown up and was making the airplanes skid when it landed on it. The airstrip wasn't drying out and it was all muddy. And we had to clean off the whole airstrip. Now we're talking about 3,000 feet of airstrip that has to be stripped of all of its grass. Now I can't afford that. So I called in the Downey people and I said, look, what can we do to fix this airstrip? And they said, you know what, this is our airstrip as well. This material comes in for us. It's not just your airstrip. Let's work together on it. I said, how do we do that? They said, pandana season is in. You buy all the pandanus fruit you can. We men will work on the airstrip all day long. The women will cook the pandanus, And at 3 o'clock every day, we'll stop and have a pandanus feast. And all you have to do is just feed us. Well, I could buy a pandanus fruit for a nickel. So I bought all the pandanus fruit. I think it cost me about $200 to buy a week's supply of pandanus fruit to feed everybody that came out and worked on the crew. And I had thousands of people working on the air crew, on the airstrip. And all I had to do was pay them lunch. They were basically working for free, but they did it because that's what reciprocity does. I was giving lunch, they were giving labor. That's how reciprocity works. Well, reciprocity works to build social solidarity. Build social solidarity. You become part of the prestige of the culture. You know, when we were doing this building of the airstrip, or working on the airstrip, the feast leader would stand up and say, "Isn't Hayward a great guy? Look at, he's feeding us. He's taking care of, he's sponsoring this feast. He's one of us." You know, I was embarrassed to tears. You know, we're not used to this kind of being bragged on. But they were bragging on me because they were saying, he acts socially responsible. We can count on him. And this airstrip will be our strip. It's not just his. Well, it was a marvelous time. We have one more characteristic that we want to talk about, and that is that inability to participate marginalizes non-participants. Marginalizes non-participants. If you don't participate in economic exchanges in a manner that is socially responsible, that establishes social solidarity, you're going to get yourself into big-time trouble because people don't know how to deal with you. Now, we're going to pick this point up when we start back for our second session. I think we'll stop and take a break at this point. We'll come back, we'll pick up this marginalization of non-participants. What happens when you don't participate in gift giving? And then we want to move on to the fact that this kind of exchange works in all economies. Then we're going to move on and talk about what those economies are like. So let's take a break. All right, we left off talking about how gift giving or reciprocity helps to marginalize non-participants. Let's talk a little bit more about how that happens. People who do not give gifts, who do not get involved in the economic exchanges, are not considered part of the social exchanges and the emotions, the investment, the sense of obligation that comes with the giving of gifts. And so what happens is you are pushed then to the category of an outsider, or as someone who doesn't belong. You're not an integral part of the society. You have not become someone who can be trusted or needed or can be incorporated into the normal flow of social events. So you are thrust into the outside. Oh, that's just the way they are, kind of thing. They're not even human, kind of thing. And you can be marginalized, even excluded from the human race. You can also send confusing messages if you give the wrong kind of gift. For instance, in certain cultures, in Africa, for instance, gift giving, it indicates the level of friendship that exists between you, so that only certain kinds of people would give gifts. And one missionary who was working with a group of Africans in this particular part of the country decided that he wanted to become friends with one of the local pastors, and so he invited the pastor and his wife to come and have dinner with him. So he and his wife fixed up a lovely meal, and the pastor was so excited, and he came with his wife, and they had a very delightful time, and they enjoyed the pleasantries and the exchange of food, and the evening went well, and the pastor left. And the pastor was so excited because their whole relationship had now entered a new level, a level in which they could dine together. Well, several days went by, and guest arrived at the pastor's home, and he didn't have some food to give to the guest. And he needed to provide them with a meal and didn't have anything. So he sent a messenger to his missionary friend, whom he had just established friends with, and said, "Excuse me, we've just had company coming. Would you give us some food to give to our company?" Well, the missionary just went into a rage. My goodness. I invite them into my home, try to be friends with them, and what do? They try to use the friendship now to wheedle me out of things that I've got, that they know I've got here, to take care of their own needs. If he's got company, it's his own problem to take care of. And all they want to do is use the friendship now to add to their own physical well-being. And he refused to give them any food for his company. And the messenger went back to the pastor, and the pastor was embarrassed and he was confused because, unbeknownst to the missionary, a confusing signal was sent. By inviting him to dinner, you were saying, look, from now on, we can give an exchange. We can expect certain kind of reciprocity here. And the pastor thought that it would be all right because they were now at this new level of relationship to ask for food. The missionary understood it, an entirely different thing, that he was using a friendship to become materialistic and greedy. Confusing signals being sent. Now, I have seen this happen all the time. When we were in Donny Culture, we were at a conference. A group of folk had come in from outside. They were all fellow missionaries. They were working in various parts of the island. We were having this conference, and this old man came in to the conference grounds, and he wanted to sell a lovely stone axe. Now, the going price for a stone axe of this size, it was a good-sized stone axe, was about $35. And so the missionary turned to me and he said, "What's this axe worth?" I said, "Oh, it's worth about $35. And he said, "I'll bet I can get it cheaper than that." So he said to the man, he said, "I'll give you $10 for it." And the old guy looked at him, and he knew it was worth $35. And he looked around at everybody, and he thought for a minute, and he said, "Okay, I'll give it to you for $10. And the missionary was ecstatic, and I said, "George," I shouldn't have said his name, Ralph, well, I said, "George, that axe is worth $35. Give him $35 for it." He said, "No, he said he'd accept 10. I said, "He doesn't know how to barter." I said, "They don't barter in this culture. That's what you do out at the coast, where the seller starts up at 35, you start at 10, and you come together in the middle for $18, and everybody's happy." I said, "That works in a market economy. It doesn't work in a reciprocity culture." And my missionary colleague turned to me and said, "Well, he's going to have to learn to get used to the real world." He said $10, I'm going to give him $10. He gave him $10, took the axe, and walked off. And I thought, you know what? That old man took the $10 because he's working on a reciprocity kind of system. He's going to expect that some missionary someday is going to give him far more value in return for something of much less value, because he will expect balanced reciprocity to take place. And if somebody doesn't make it good, that old man will never understand what happened here, and he could turn quite bitter. Mixed signals were being sent. Now, do you want... I've got a gift here. It's a lovely little necklace. And I've been thinking about this a long time. There's a young lady in this class that I've had in several classes before. Her name's Yana. She's from Russia. And you want to know something? I think Yana is beautiful. Beautiful Russian woman. Blonde hair, lovely. Let's not go into the details. But and I've been thinking a long time that I'd like to do something for Yana. And so I've bought this necklace for Yana, just to It's, no reason. And I'd like to present Yana with this necklace to wear, just because you're beautiful. What did I just do? Is it appropriate for me to give this necklace to Yana? No. Absolutely. What am I signaling here by offering to give this necklace to Yana for no reason other than the fact that I think she's beautiful? I'm signaling some very bad intentions. Married men don't give single girls necklaces for no reason other than the fact that they're beautiful, unless they're working a big-time scam. And you started to get embarrassed. Yes, she did. She started to get very red. And she started to, well, thank you. And I saw the shocked look and something, what is Hayward doing? I was sending some messages to Yana. Okay? Some messages. Now, is it wrong that I should want to compliment somebody on their beauty? No. God's even led me sometimes to tell somebody, you know what? You're a beautiful young woman. I told that to a young lady today who was struggling, see, with some very serious doubts about who she was, what God wanted to do for her. And I affirmed who she was in Jesus Christ. And among the many things I told her was I thought she was beautiful. But I wasn't scamming her. I wasn't sending the wrong signal by trying to give her, now, Yana, there's nothing in there. I want you to know. I was making a point. When we give gifts, we send signals. And if we give the wrong gift for the wrong occasion, we send the wrong signal. And when we send the wrong signal, we embarrass people. We compromise people's understanding of us. And we're not exactly sure what to do. We create an awkward situation, just as I did with poor Yana. Now, I usually like to find somebody that really gets flustered and embarrassed. And the only, well, you girls in this class are not the kind that get easily flustered. So I wasn't quite sure who to pick on, so I picked on Yana because I figured she could handle it. Would you? No. Well, okay. We marginalize one another when we send the wrong signals. And do you know what? When we move to another culture and we don't know the rules for reciprocity, we send those wrong signals. And we do it all the time. So one of the things that we've got to do is try to understand the basis of reciprocity, because you see, reciprocity functions even in modern economic systems. We have a very interesting system right now in our political system. Politics works by the giving and receiving of favors. Now, I hate to say it. I know people in politics. I'll vote for your sewer project if you will vote for my curb project. I will vote for your building project if you will vote for my pier project. You exchange votes, you exchange favors. Can I count on your support for this measure that I'm introducing? Yes, you can count on my support. And 6 months from now, when I'm introducing a bill, I come to you and say, can I count on your support for my bill? I supported yours. That's how our whole political system works. You trade favors. And that's why term limits is such a problem with our current political system. See, because by the time you build up enough favors that you can finally get your way through Congress and you can finally get your way to push a bill through that you want, so you have to be out of office. So there's an attempt to break that whole system of favors. But you want to know something? That's how American politics works. Now, some people who abuse the system actually try to buy votes. And that's one of the things that's happening in our political system right now. People from China, from Indonesia, have tried to give donations to certain political parties in favor for certain kinds of special considerations. And that's against the law. There's a fine line between reciprocity and buying. And a good politician has to know how to work that fine line. See? It's our whole political system. Now, the same thing happens in business. See? You exchange favors. You give Christmas gifts. You make sure that your partners are taken care of. We're even doing it when it comes to the forgiveness of certain kinds of international debt. Look, you don't cut down so many thousand acres of timber in Brazil and we'll forgive the interest on your international loan. We're buying ecological awareness and sensitivity by the forgiveness of certain kinds of debts. See? So the whole world is working on a system, and we need to be very astute so that we know how to work that without at the same time abusing it. Now, that's reciprocity. We need to move on to talking about redistribution, because that's the second system. Reciprocity is the beginning. Redistribution is the second form. What happens in redistribution? In redistribution, you have to have a couple of very important things taking place. You have to have sufficient authority invested in the central government that they have the power to collect goods. They can inflict pain, death, or punishment and force the collection of goods. When they have this authority, then they can come out and collect from you, and then they can redistribute those goods or that wealth to the rest of the nation. So they collect from the people and they redistribute back to the people. Now, what are some examples of how redistribution works? Well, let me give you an example of an early system of redistribution. Joseph in Egypt. You remember the story? He's in jail. He's there on trumped-up charges. He's stuck. He starts to interpret people's dreams. And the word goes out that he can interpret dreams. And the king has a very disturbing dream. And the word gets to him that there's a guy in jail who knows how to read dreams. So Joseph comes in. Did I say David? Okay. Somewhere or another. Did I slip? Well, Joseph comes into the court, tells Pharaoh his dream. 7 cows, fat ones, 7 lean ones. Here's the interpretation. There will be 7 good years, 7 lean years. Resolve this by collecting from the people during the fat years so you can redistribute during the lean years. So, king's impressed. There are 7 good years. During that 7 good years, Joseph is the most popular man in the whole land, isn't he? I don't think so. Joseph is the most hated man in all of Egypt because he's going around, everybody's having these wonderful harvests. Here comes the tax man, see, collecting from all these people. You got to pay the tax. Taxes just went up. See? Well, it's not really taxes, it's the collection. And he's coming with soldiers. And he's collecting all of this extra grain. And the people are grumbling and they're rumbling and there's, we don't want to pay this to Pharaoh, you know. We hate Joseph. But then what happened? 7 lean years. And Joseph then has all of these storehouses filled with grain. And it's redistributed back to the people. And all of a sudden, the most hated man in the land becomes the most loved man. Because they've got granaries full of food. They can go out to the people. And he's being praised everywhere. I mean, I assume so. The Bible doesn't tell us this. Well, that's redistribution. See? Now, what are the forms of redistribution? First of all, there is what we call taxes. April 15th is coming. I hope your taxes are done. Mine are not. I've got to get busy. Hopefully, I've held out enough all year long, I don't have to pay. Hopefully, I'm going to get some money back. But you know what? I give willingly and gladly of every penny I have to give to the government, right? I don't think so. I don't give them a penny more than I have to give. Now, that's probably a bad attitude. But you know what? There are a lot of people who say, yeah, I want to pay my taxes. Why? What happens when we pay our taxes? Well, it comes back to us. It comes back to us in the form of public works, roads, sewers, fire department, policemen, schools, all these good things that we all need and want. And a lot of people are quite happy to pay their taxes. I am one of the reluctant few in this country who doesn't like to pay taxes. Well, we won't go into that. I pay. I don't cheat. But I don't pay a penny more than I have to. And I make sure I get all of the tax breaks I can get. But that's only one way to redistribute. There's a second way, and that is what we call tribute. And when it comes to tribute, a powerful nation or a powerful leader sends out his troops and his armies and says, you guys, we're going to protect you. Or we're not going to kill you, providing you pay us tribute. See? Make us wealthy and we'll leave you alone. See? Protection money. Or at least the promise of peace. And so people would pay tribute. See? Pay and we won't kill you. Pay and we won't burn your cities. Pay and we won't pillage your crops. See? So tribute is a way. A third way that you have redistribution is in the required labor on behalf of the common good. So you would build temples or cities or walls or palaces or anything else that will be to the common good of the country. You may even be asked to work in agricultural projects. For instance, the building of a dam or the building of rice paddies. In lieu of payment of cash or of crops, you give your labor. And people have done this for literally thousands of years. This is a redistribution of the effort of the community for the common good of everybody involved. Now, this kind of redistribution takes place in the South Pacific. It took place in Africa. It took place in Asia. It took place in the Middle East. It took place even in medieval Europe and England. It was a way, see, of contributing to the common good through redistribution. Now, one of the most common forms of redistribution is communism. Communism is a form of redistribution. Everybody works for the government, then the government redistributes back to the people on the basis of their need. Now, it turned out to be a fairly inefficient form of redistribution because, like me, most people don't want to give more than they get back. Redistribution works in our country where we have taxes. We pay taxes, it's paid back to us. So redistribution continues to work in any form of socialism, communism, or even in a capitalist system in which you have a form of support for the major, for the government systems and infrastructure. Now, in addition to redistribution, which can work through a whole series of educational or not educational, economic systems, you also have the function of what we call a market exchange. Market exchange system. Several things must function in order to have a market work effectively. First of all, you must have a system of money. Markets do not work well without money. You cannot have a market functioning with simply a barter system. You must have some kind of money. Secondly, you must have some way of setting prices so that you know that a certain kind of item is worth a certain value. And that value may fluctuate, but you have to have some way of knowing what the value is. In order for that to function well, exchanges must take place without coercion. If somebody refuses to sell, then that refusal to sell must be honored. If you are forced to sell, the market conditions are at an end. If somebody points a gun at you and says, you will sell me that basket, and the price will be, see, the market system is off. Now you have a system of dominance that is closer to a form of taxation or outright corruption. So, the market conditions must exist. These three principles must be at work. When you then go into certain things must also accompany then these three conditions. First of all, goods and services must have some kind of monetary value. A day's labor has to have a set value. Now, interestingly enough, where we were working in an economy that was reciprocal, a day's labor did not have the price associated with it. You couldn't say, look, come work for me and I'll pay you $1.50 for the day's work. They had never done anything like this before. When we came as outsiders and said, look, we would like to build an airstrip here, and we'll pay you to build the airstrip, we introduced a whole new economic principle that had never been experienced by the interior tribal peoples of New Guinea. Paid for a day's labor. See, at the end of the day, they'd all line up, and we would, at first we would pay in salt. See, we'd pay a scoopful of salt, because that's what they wanted. And everybody would get a scoopful of salt for their day's work. They were delighted with that scoopful of salt. After a while, they had enough salt. They didn't need any more salt. See? So then we started paying in little work chits. See? Every day's work, you got a little piece of paper that had my signature on it. And at the end of the week, we would then open up a little store that we had, and you could bring in all of your work chits, and you could exchange those then for something like a knife or a shirt or a pair of shorts or an axe if you could get enough of them. And we would see people saying, hey, I want to buy an axe, and there are 30 of these little slips. I've only got 10. Anybody help me? And they'd start collecting from people, and they'd get 20 in. I say, you need 2 more. And they'd turn around, somebody hand them 2 more, and they'd get 30, and then they'd get an axe, and they'd go off. And the axe would be, frankly, family-owned, because everybody had put in their work chits. Everybody worked all week to help that person buy the axe. But you had to have a monetary value set, and we introduced the concept of monetary value for labor and for goods. Then you have to have a situation in which people live by the selling of their goods and services, which means that you have to start having an employer-employee relationship. Now, that seems quite natural to us, employer-employee relationship. But you want to know something? In certain tribal economies, they don't know what an employer-employee relationship is. When we hired somebody, they had no term for saying, I work for Hayward. You know what they had to say? I'm Hayward's adopted son. Or I'm Hayward's adopted daughter. I mean, I must have had 30 kids. They were all the people that I employed to help us run the mission station. We'd hire somebody to watch over the airstrip to make sure that it was taken care of. Somebody else that would be responsible for bringing in the firewood. Somebody else that was responsible for taking care of the cows. And they were all my adopted kids. Because they had no term for employee-employer. And do you want to know something? An employer-employee relationship is very different than a son and daughter with father. They had certain rights as my kids. They could go into my workshop and borrow a hammer and take it home. Where'd my hammer go? Oh, I took it home. Why? I needed to do something with it. But you don't have any right to take my hammer. Why not? I'm your son. So we had to work out the differences in attitude between employer-employee and father, son, daughter, with all the people that we hired. And eventually we started making the transition to the idea of selling of labor. You also have to have a marketplace, a place where the market will work. In the feudal days of European society, these markets were located in the small towns. People went to town to find these markets. And as they went to these towns, they found themselves able to give and to exchange goods. And you want to know something? It was as the towns began to grow and get power, and as the economy of the towns increased, it diminished the power of the feudal lords of the manor. And it was the growth of the marketplace in the towns that destroyed the whole feudal system of peasants and lords of the manor. Well, a final principle is that the market works by self-regulation of the economy. The hidden hand that runs the marketplace. Okay? The existence of the marketplace and the self-regulation of the economy. As the economy is self-regulating, okay, prices will fluctuate, demand and supply will work, and so the whole principle of the marketplace begins to take over. Now, as the marketplace begins to take over, a whole new way of exchanging wealth begins to kick in. And that new way of exchanging wealth that is no longer based on reciprocity or redistribution, a whole new way of exchanging goods that comes into being is called capitalism. And I would like to talk about capitalism. I would like to talk about the social characteristics of capitalism, because there are some very important corollaries. Capitalism cannot function without certain specific principles being in place. And the first of these is that you must have ownership of land, or the right to own land. If you do not have the right to own land, you cannot have capitalism. So, ownership of land, that's the first principle. The second principle, or second characteristic of capitalism, is the right to the control of the means of production. All right? So you can own a piece of land, and on that piece of land, you can build a water wheel so that you can channel the water that flows over the land into your water wheel. The water wheel can now begin to turn. You can hook that water wheel up through a system of gears to a grinding stone, and you can now set up your own mill. You have the right to establish a mill. People can now bring their grain to you. You can now crush it and make flour. You have set up your own business. If you cannot control the means of production, either through the construction of a corporation or an establishment of some sort, you cannot have capital, or you cannot have capitalism. A third characteristic is you must be able to exploit labor. Now, here's where my bias comes in. See, because a good capitalist would not say exploitation of labor. It would say the ability to hire labor. But, hey, if you're going to produce cheap, sell high, make a profit, how do you produce cheap? Pay your workers as little as you can get by with, so you can produce cheap, so you can sell high, so you can make a profit. So I use the term exploitation of labor very, very carefully, because you see, this is exactly how capitalism has worked. We have tried to keep labor costs low, or at least production costs low, in order to have maximum amount of profit, so that we can use the profit then for the creation of more wealth. Now, in order to keep production costs low, we continue to exploit labor by trying to find the cheapest labor available. So in this country, where was the cheapest labor available in the first few years of this country, first few decades, the first 100 or 200 years of this country? Where was the cheapest labor? Slave labor. So we used slave labor. When slave labor ended, where did we get cheap labor after that? We started importing the Irish. Do any of you know where the Erie Canal is? One person? Where's the Erie Canal?
It's in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. Who dug the Erie Canal? Irish laborers. They came over by the boatload because they were willing. I mean, they were starving to death in Ireland. The British were starving them to death. They would do anything to get out of Ireland. It was a place with no future. So they came to the United States. We put them to work on the Erie Canal. We also put them to work at $1 a day building the railroad across this country. That was all Irish labor. And when we ran out of Irish laborers, we brought in Italian laborers. Or we brought in Portuguese laborers. And when we ran out of those, we went all the way to China and we brought in Chinese laborers, we brought in Filipino laborers, we brought in Indian laborers, we brought in Japanese labor, we brought in anybody that would work for $1 a day or less. And we built this country on the backs of cheap labor. And when that ran out, when we couldn't bring any more in without social destruction, what did we then do? We started taking our manufacturing overseas, where we could still get cheap labor. What country is the biggest producers of shoes in the world today? Take a guess. Korea. Korea is the biggest producers of shoes today. Why Korea? Is it because Koreans are better at making shoes than anybody else in the whole world? No. It's because they were the ones who were willing to work the cheapest. And when the Korean economy kept improving and they kept demanding more wages, what did they do with Nike shoes? They moved out of Korea and they went to Indonesia. Check the labels on your clothes. See where they're made. First it was Hong Kong and Singapore, and when they started raising their wages, then it moved to Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia. We are making clothes overseas. We're making all kinds of stuff overseas because it's cheap labor. And Brad Christensen, who teaches in our sociology department here, chronicled one time in a little study that he presented on the production of an American car. Do you know how much an American car is produced in this country? Such a small, pitiful part that it's crazy to think that it was American made. Do you know that they even send all their bookkeeping from certain car companies down to the Caribbean, where people are willing to work as bookkeepers in the Caribbean? I mean, they can do this, you know, with computers and faxes and things. They do all the bookkeeping down in the Bahamas because people in the Bahamas are willing to work cheaper than bookkeepers in this country. So the bookkeeping gets shipped overseas and the production gets shipped overseas and everything gets shipped back and forth. And finally, it's all put together here, and very little of it was done in this country. Why? Because we want 20 bucks an hour or else. See, minimum wage here is $5.25 an hour. Do you know what minimum wage is in Indonesia? $1.50 a day. A day. $1.50 a day. And if you don't like them salary, get out of here. There's 6 people waiting in line to take your job. Right. And so people overseas, so we ship all of our stuff overseas, and they're happy to get the work. Well, I don't know about happy to get the work, but at least it's being shipped overseas. And so we are working in a whole economy now which is globalizing, Technology and knowledge are centered here, manual labor centered elsewhere, and then all the goods are brought back here, and we then get to benefit from this international economy. Well, something else is taking place besides the exploitation of labor. A fourth principle, and that fourth principle is the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few people. That is a fourth characteristic of capitalism. Once again, this is not something you will find in a traditional class on capitalism. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. Oh, Hayward, are you some kind of a communist? I've actually had students ask other teachers, is Hayward a communist? No, I'm not a communist. I'm just an economic anthropologist looking at the cold, hard facts. You want to look at the cold, hard facts? Let's take a look at them. See, we've talked here about the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. Who controls America? Is that a provocative title or what? Are you aware that in the United States, the super rich constitute 0.5%, 0.5% of the United States population? That 0.5% of the United States population controls 35.1% of the wealth of the United States. Those are the super rich. The very rich, which is the next category down, another 0.5%. See, not even 1%, 1/2 of 1%, all right? 0.5%, they control 6.7% of the wealth. We are now up to 41.8% controlled by 1% of the United States population. That's almost half of the wealth of the United States controlled by 1% of our population. The other group, the next group, those who are simply rich, constituting 9% of the population, control 29.9% of the wealth in America. You know what that works out to be? It ought to be easy. It's written right there. 10% of the population of the United States controls 71.7% of the wealth of the United States. And 90% of the population, who's that 90%? You, your mums and dads, Biola professors, other poor people. 90% of the population control a meager 28.3% of the wealth of this nation. Now, these figures are all based on the 1983 Federal Reserve Board report. You say, oh, Hayward, those figures are way out of date. You know why I use them? Because they've gotten worse since. The rich have gotten richer, and the poor have gotten poorer. So I'm giving you the best statistics, not the worst. All right? You're saying, wait a minute, what are you even talking about? I'm not sure I believe this. Let me give you some more. There are 420,000 super rich families. 420,000 super rich families who control $10.6 trillion of the wealth in the United States. Who are those families? The Waltons. Who the heck are the Waltons? Anybody know who the Waltons are? The Waltons consist of 5 people, Walton brothers and I think a sister. They are the owners of Walmart. Ever hear of that? Owned by the Walton family. The Waltons and the Kennedys, and do you want to know something? We got to add one more super rich family. Bill Gates. Bill Gates has made it, see? So we had the Waltons and the Kennedys. Well, according to the 1997 Forbes magazine statement regarding the richest people in America, the 5 Walton siblings of the Walmart chain hold positions 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 of the richest people in America. They're not even the richest, just 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. They each have a worth, net worth, $6.4 billion each. Poor babies, see? The Kennedy clan, Ever hear of the Kennedys? Okay, Kennedy clan. There are 53 members of the Kennedy family. See, not just the ones who run politics, but there are 53. Do you know that in 1991, when they still had to broadcast some of their wealth because of political reasons, the 53 members of the Kennedy family got an annual allotment of their share of the family wealth, you know, just the interest off of their investments. They had to split between their 53 members a mere $20 million as their take for that year, their allowance, if you would. $20 million for 53 people? Poor babies. What am I going to do with $500,000, see, this year? Now, these are figures for the United States. Do you want to know something? When capitalism goes to work in other countries, the same thing happens. Are you aware that according to the Wall Street Journal, 50% of the assets of Mexico, the whole nation of Mexico, 50% of the assets sit in 18,600 bank accounts. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer. Now, let's play around with this a little bit. How does that work in our culture? Well, here are the highest paid entertainers for 1994 and 1995. Steven Spielberg made, in 1 year, $285 million. Poor Stevie boy. Oprah Winfrey, $146 million. Beatles, $130 million. Rolling Stones, $121 million. David Copperfield. You know, who's David Copperfield? He's a magician. Oh, poor baby, only made $81 million. Pink Floyd. I've heard of Pink Panther. Who's Pink Floyd? Ah, yes. $70 million. Michael Jackson. And I'm not going to grab where he grabs because I get embarrassed. See, $67 million. See, poor old Barbara Streisand. Gee, $63 million. Sylvester Stallone, can you believe all those dumb Sylvester Stallone movies? $58 million in 1994. Tom Hanks, $52 million. Bill Cosby, $49 million. Andrew Lloyd Webber, $48 million. Harrison Ford, that was before he made Air Force One, mere $46 million. Stephen King, $43 million. Grateful Dead, $42 million. You're going to love this next one. Barney, $40 million. Who's Barney? A Muppet, a puppet on Channel 28. See. Siegfried and Roy, $40 million. Garth Brooks. Boy, I should start to twang through my nose, you know. Garth Brooks, $40 million. Michael Crichton, $39 million. Jim Carrey, stupid rubber face, $39 million. Robert Zemeckis, $37 million. Charles Schultz, who's Charles Schultz? Peanuts, $36 million. Elton John, this was before he made the Die song, you know, $35 million. Poor old Brucey Willis, darn, only $35 million. Billy Joel, 33. Arnold Schwarzenegger, $33 million. Clint Eastwood, $32 million. Roseanne, $32 million. Michael Douglas, 31. Boys to Men, 31. Aerosmith, 30. David Letterman, 29. John Grisham, 29. Tom Clancy. What's Tom Clancy do? Writes mystery novels. Tom Clancy, 28 million. Jimmy Buffett, 26 million. Robin Williams, that was before Good Will Hunting, 25 million. Bon Jovi, 25 million. Kevin Costner, poor baby. He turns out such dumb, stupid movies. He only made 24 million. And Demi Moore, $21 million. You know, it's a good thing Demi's married to Bruce Willis, because with his $35 million, her $21 million, they probably got made enough to get by. Where are they getting all this money? By comparison, the average LA County school teacher earns $30,000 per year. You want to know something? It would take 600 years to make the bottom of the list, to get up there with Demi Moore for making one stupid movie. Now tell me, are 600 teachers of lesser value than a Demi Moore movie? And what about this wretched Titanic that's making the rounds right now? People are going apes over a good-looking guy standing up there at the front of the ship. I'm flying! No wonder you're flying, laughing all the way to the bank. How important are movies to us? Wouldn't 600 teachers be a lot better for us? Where are our values in our culture? Well, how come you're so sober? We all love good entertainment, don't we? But you see what's happening here? There's a skewed difference between the rich and the poor. And do you want to know something? Money is flowing into the hands of the richer far faster than it is flowing into the hands of the poor. And a gap is opening up very, very dramatically in our culture. And that ought to raise some very serious alarm signals for every one of us. Because it's not only happening in our country, it's happening globally. As capitalism is beginning to dominate the world's economies. And do you want to know something? Japan is fighting to keep American capitalism from dominating their country. And there are other countries that are fighting the whole capitalist principle, because you see, they have some very serious concerns about the amorality. Did you hear me? The amorality of capitalism. That hidden hand that is favoring the rich over the poor. And they're saying that hidden hand needs to be directed by moral accountability and responsibility. So, I bring you now to the last reflection that we want to make. Are any one of these economic systems that we've talked about more Christian than another? We've talked about redistribution. We've talked about reciprocity. We've talked about a market economy. And we've talked about capitalism. Are any one of them more Christian than another? Well, as we look at these economic systems, the most evident thing that comes to mind is the realization that some of these systems do encourage moral responsibility. Reciprocity encourages moral responsibility. And if you do not play morally, you are excluded from the system. And tremendous economic privilege, pressure is placed upon you for not working the moral responsibility. Other systems encourage productivity. That would be capitalism. Capitalism encourages productivity. We get maximum productivity through capitalism. But we get moral unevenness because capitalism tends to appeal to materialism and greediness. But you want to know something? Even in Donny culture, we saw people express greediness and unfairness. We saw folk trying to eat food in private, hoarding. Even in a system that encouraged giving, there was human sinfulness. You see, because every economic system is subject to sinful manipulation. This was one of the reasons why communism has failed. As morally lofty as it was, it failed because of human sinfulness. As a consequence, I can only say that every one of these systems is subject to the sin of humanity and is therefore in need of the transforming power of God's presence. And as Christians, whether we are in a reciprocal economic cycle, whether we are in a redistribution economic cycle, whether we are in a market economy, whether we are in a communist society or a socialist society, or whether we are in an outright capitalist society, we must bring godly influence to bear upon market exchanges so that we are saying, look, I will not be caught up with the sinful manipulation of this economic system. I will use the extreme productivity that our culture allows in order to be fair to the poor, to return to those who are in need. You know, one of the most interesting observations that I have as I study the Old Testament is that God built into the Old Testament economy a leveling mechanism. You know what that leveling mechanism was?
Was that the year of Jubilee?
The year of Jubilee. In the year of Jubilee, everything was turned back to God. And everybody got a fresh start. All debts were canceled. All land that had been sold was returned to its original owners. And everybody had a fresh start so that for 50 years they could begin to build. But there was this leveling mechanism so that the rich did not get rich at the expense of the poor. This was a marvelous kingdom principle regarding our necessity, our need, to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to become all that God wants them to be. I am not a communist. I do not favor communism. But I'm not a good capitalist either. You see, because I am not convinced that capitalism has the concern of the worker and of the poor as its chief objective. And somehow or another, I must stand as a prophet speaking against the sinful manipulation of both capitalism, communism, reciprocity, redistribution. I must speak out for kingdom values. And if we do that, if we can understand the principles that are at work and continue to live for the glory of Jesus Christ, then we will fulfill the role that God has given us to be salt in the earth. And with that, we bring our lecture to a conclusion.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.